Welcome, dear listener. This is your time now, a space to slow down, to loosen your thoughts, and to drift into a world where every sound is softened and every moment is touched with calm. Let your body find comfort where it rests. Feel the steady rise and fall of your breath, like the turning of quiet pages. Tonight, we'll wander together into a story of stillness, companionship, and a love so gentle it feels like a dream you don't need to wake from. This is a tale of words and silence, of a book that waited to be finished, and of two souls who found each other between the lines. Nothing will hurry you here. Every detail will arrive slowly, like ink spreading across paper or moonlight lingering on a window pane. And as you listen, you may let your eyes grow heavy, your breath softer, your thoughts light as feathers. The story will carry you even. As you drift towards sleep. So let us begin. Theo lived in a quiet loft at the top of an old stone building, where the streets below hushed themselves early and the night stretched long and silent. His room was lined with shelves of books, their spines worn smooth from years of reaching, reading, and returning. Yet on his desk there lay only one book, his own. The pages were filled with neat, flowing handwriting, a story he had lived inside for months, maybe years. And yet the last page remained empty, a chapter unfinished, a sentence waiting. Every evening, Theo would sit in his worn chair by the window, the soft glow of a lamp at his side, and he would turn to that final page. He would rest his hand upon it, pen ready, and wait for the words to come. But the silence always lingered longer than his thoughts. The window was always cracked open just slightly, letting the night drift in the faint rustle of willow branches. The smell of damp stone after rain, the gentle hush of air that whispered through the curtains. And in that quiet, Theo would imagine what might belong there, what words could close a story that had become so close to his heart. But each time the page remained blank, he would lean back, set the pen down, and sigh into the stillness. It wasn't sorrow that filled him. It wasn't frustration. It was something softer, a longing, tender and wistful, like the feeling of waiting for a letter that never arrived. A sense that the words he sought weren't his alone to find. On some nights, he would whisper to the page as if it could answer him, "Tell me, how does it end?" But the paper only waited. The ink never flowed. So he would close the book, place it carefully on the desk, and sit a little longer by the window, watching the moon climb its slow, unhurried path across the sky. And then, at last, he would drift into sleep, the unfinished page resting close by, like a gentle ache, like a question without a reply. And somewhere, just beyond the veil of dreams, the answer was waiting for him. That night, as Theo's breathing slowed, the weight of the unfinished book near his bed seemed to follow him into his dreams. At first, there was only the hush of stillness, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. But then, slowly, shapes began to gather around him. The dim outline of a meadow, soft with dew, a narrow stream that glimmered faintly, catching the glow of starlight, and beside it a great willow tree, its long branches trailing down like gentle curtains, swaying in a wind that he could not feel. He stood there at the edge of the dream, watching. Everything seemed familiar, though he could not remember ever walking through this place. The grass bent easily beneath his steps, and the air carried a scent of something both green and sweet, like early spring. And then he saw her, beneath the willow's veil of branches. A woman sat quietly at a low wooden table. Her head was bent, her hand moving slowly across a sheet of paper. The ink she used glowed faintly, gold and soft, as though the stars themselves had melted into her pen. She didn't look up at first. Her focus was steady, patient. The strokes of her hand were unhurried, as if she were not writing at all, but listening for words that wanted to arrive on their own. Theo stepped closer, the sound of his breath blending with the faint trickle of the stream. It felt as though he might startle her if he drew too near, and yet she seemed already aware of him. Her voice came softly without lifting her eyes. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" Theo's heart moved gently in his chest. Not startled, not shaken, only warmed by a strange, quiet recognition. He tried to speak, but in the dream, words seemed to dissolve before they left his lips. Still, she smiled a smile so faint, so serene, it seemed to glow more than the ink itself. She turned the page slightly so he could see, and there, in golden letters, was a sentence he had never written. A sentence that felt like the closing of a long journey, the resting of something that had wandered too far. Theo stepped closer. The branches of the willow brushed softly against his shoulder. The night air curled around him like a blanket. "It isn't your ending alone," she whispered. "It belongs to both of us." Her words lingered in the air, softer than the night breeze, and Theo felt the heaviness of longing shift into something else, something lighter, like the hush before dawn. And as he stood there, watching her write in golden ink, the thought came to him gently. Without force, perhaps the story had always been waiting for her. And so the meadow, the stream, the willow, and her steady hand became his quiet journey, the path not of searching for words, but of being led toward them. The dream seemed to stretch without measure, neither bound by hours nor by moments. Time moved softly, like the drifting of clouds across a slow night sky. Theo found himself returning night after night, each time guided by the same hush of willow branches and the faint glimmer of the stream. And always she was there, the woman with the quiet smile, her hand poised above the page, writing with ink that shimmered like morning light. At first, Theo only watched. He would stand a little distance away, listening to the gentle scratch of her pen, the steady rhythm of words finding their way into form. But then gradually he began to hear them. Her sentences carried a softness he had never known in his own. Writing. Each line seemed less written and more breathed, like the way rain settles on leaves, or the way twilight lingers on rooftops before giving itself to night. When she read them aloud, her voice fell into the dream like a melody. Sometimes endings are not endings at all, only a turning of the page. Theo felt something stir within him, not urgency, not the pressing need to seize the words, but a slow warmth, as though he had been carrying a silence that she now filled. On one evening, he gathered the courage to speak. His voice came low, uncertain but steady, like a first note on a long-forgotten instrument. "You write as though you've always known the story." She paused, lifting her gaze to meet his. Her eyes were calm, reflective, like water at dusk. "Perhaps I have, or perhaps the story has always known me." Her answer, simple and unhurried, settled deep into him, and as their eyes lingered, Theo realized it wasn't only the words she gave him. It was her presence, the quiet assurance that he didn't have to reach alone anymore. One night she set her pen down and slid the paper toward him. "Here," she whispered, "add a line if you'd like." Theo hesitated, the pen light in his hand, almost weightless. His fingers brushed the edge of the paper, and for the first time he felt the page welcome him, as though it had been waiting not for his hand alone, but for both of theirs. He wrote slowly. Just a single sentence, nothing more. But when he finished, she smiled, not wide, not sudden, just a curve of warmth that seemed to ease the night itself. And in that silence that followed, Theo understood. The tenderness between them was not in grand declarations, nor in hurried emotion. It lived in the pauses, in the way her voice slowed when reading his words, in the way she tilted her head, as though listening for something beyond sound.it was a closeness that unfolded gently, like the turning of a page. And so, dream after dream, he returned, and night after night their words met on the paper. Two voices blending into one, quiet as breath, steady as moonlight. There came a night when the dream felt different. The meadow seemed fuller somehow, the willow branches heavier with silver light, as if the moon had leaned closer just to watch. Theo walked the familiar path, his steps softened by dew. He found her as he always did, sitting quietly at the low wooden table, golden ink flowing from her pen like a thread spun from stars. But this time she was not writing. She was waiting. The paper before her lay untouched. The pen rested still. And when Theo approached, she lifted her gaze at once, as though she had been listening for him. "You've been searching," she said gently, "but not for words." Theo paused, the truth of her voice folded into him, like a key sliding in two. A lock. He realized then that the ache he carried each evening, the unfinished weight of his book, had never been only about the ending of a story. It was about the empty space beside him. "I thought it was the chapter I couldn't finish," he whispered. "But it was me." The woman rose slowly, the willow leaves brushing against her shoulders as she stepped closer. She didn't rush, didn't fill the air with explanations. She only looked at him, her expression calm, steady, unafraid of silence. And in that quiet, Theo understood something he had not dared to name. She was not a character, not a figure drawn only from his imagination. She was real. The story had not created her, it had carried him to her. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the table, brushing his fingers along the page they had been filling together. The golden ink shimmered faintly under his touch, and he saw it then, their sentences intertwined so seamlessly it was impossible to tell where hers ended and his began. "This story," he murmured, his voice hushed. "It was never mine alone." She stepped closer, so near now that he could feel the quiet warmth radiating from her presence. She spoke softly, like dusk settling over the earth. "No story ever is." Her words lingered between them, gentle as the air beneath the willow. Theo felt the longing in his chest ease, not because the book was finished, but because he no longer carried its silence alone. The realization unfurled in him like a lantern glowing softly in the dark. The story had been leading him not toward an ending, but toward her. And as the night deepened around them, it felt less like a dream and more like waking for the very first time. The meadow grew quieter as the days or perhaps the dreams unfolded. The stream, once lively with ripples of starlight, now hummed in a softer rhythm, as though it too wished to listen. The willow branches bowed lower, like a curtain drawing gently around the two of them. Theo and the woman no longer stood apart. Their places were side by side now, at the low wooden table. Sometimes they wrote, their pens gliding across the page in a harmony so natural that their words seemed to lean toward each other. Other times, the pens lay still, and it was enough simply to sit together in silence. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of things unspoken, of breaths that fell in quiet unison, of glances that lingered long enough to say what neither needed to explain. Theo found himself watching the way her hand rested on the paper, how her fingers sometimes hovered as though listening for words before they came. And she, in turn, seemed to notice the soft curve of his smile when their sentences touched. One evening, or perhaps it was only another drift of dream, she slid the paper toward him. But instead of new lines to fill, she left it blank. Not every page needs words, she whispered. Theo let the thought settle. He leaned back slightly, his shoulders easing, and for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of the unfinished book pressing against him. He felt only the warmth of her nearness, the way her presence steadied the air. They sat that way for what felt like hours, her hand resting close to his, the stream murmuring like a lullaby, the willow leaves stirring gently overhead. He didn't need to reach for her hand, nor did she need to reach for his. The space between them was already filled with a closeness as deep and tender as touch, and when at last he did set his hand lightly upon the page, she placed hers beside it, not overlapping, not grasping, only resting, palm to palm, like two sentences that had finally found their place together. The book no longer seemed unfinished. It no longer demanded an ending. It simply was whole in its quiet presence, just as they were whole in theirs. And in that stillness, Theo understood that the story was not about finding the right words at all. It was about finding the silence where love could live, the night. Folded gently around them, the air cool and sweet, and for the first time in a long while, Theo felt entirely at rest. The meadow seemed to hold its breath, as though it understood that something gentle, something complete, had quietly settled into place. The willow swayed in its slow rhythm, the stream whispered like silver thread, and above them the stars seemed to lean a little closer, soft as candlelight. Theo's hand rested upon the page. Her hand lay beside his, warm, steady, unhurried. The golden ink shimmered faintly in the moon's glow, words curling and trailing like vines across the paper. Yet neither of them moved to write. It was enough now. The story had finished itself, not with an ending, but with their presence, with the simple truth of two souls meeting where silence turned to comfort. Theo turned his gaze toward her, and she met it without a word. Her smile was small, tender, as though it had always been meant for this quiet moment. He felt the weight of longing slip from him, replaced by something lighter, something as calm and enduring as the night sky. The book lay open before them, but it no longer asked for completion. It no longer waited. It simply existed, whole and luminous, its pages filled with their voices, their pauses, their closeness. After a long while, she whispered, her voice low and slow, like dusk settling into night. Sometimes the truest stories are the ones we never finish. Theo closed his eyes briefly, letting the words rest inside him. When he opened them again, the meadow seemed softer, blurred at the edges, as though it too was drifting into sleep. Their hands remained on the page, side by side, neither grasping nor letting go, only resting in the stillness of shared presence. And in that hush, with the willow bending gently above and the stars humming their quiet song, Theo felt the story close itself. Not with a full stop, but with a soft sigh, a promise that no ending was needed. The night folded around them like a blanket, and all that remained was peace. And so, dear listener, the book is complete not by the words alone, but by the tenderness that filled the spaces between them. As you rest now, you may feel the same softness, the sense that you do not need to finish every thought or find every word. It is enough simply to be, to breathe, to rest in the quiet presence of this moment. Let your body loosen into stillness. Let your breath fall into its gentle rhythm. And if sleep has not already come for you, let it find you now unhurried. Tender, steady as moonlight, for the story continues softly within your dreams. Good night.